as Tui said, I'm a bit of an interloper at this event because I'm not a specialist in SMEs. I am an employment lawyer by background, and therefore I see things slightly differently. However, I can present some basic data from the UK, even though it is only just now beginning to emerge. Next slide, please. Right. Looking at the left-hand side of the screen here, the UK, as is probably well known, did not respond particularly well to the pandemic, took a long time to get going, then panicked, and then thought about, well, what on earth are we going to do to stop this crisis? So there was a slow and somewhat incoherent response to COVID against a backdrop of the general decline of the UK economy of 10%, which is massive, which is the largest, as I say, for 300 years. And therefore, just about every business of whatever size was going to struggle. The other thing that has made things particularly dramatic in the UK has been Brexit. The SME, and I also want to include the self-employed community, because I think they are so often neglected, and they are very prominent, of course, in the service sector. The deal with the EU for us to leave focused on trade, and that was not particularly helpful for the SME and self-employed communities. Now, the data, most of which is taken from the Bank of England reports, we've seen, as you can see, cash flow losses, real struggling, some sectors badly hit. We know that they tend to be the service sectors, particularly the tourist, hospitality industries. But of course, in the UK, a particularly difficult area was the creative industries, which is our fastest growing and probably most successful sector, largely populated by SMEs and the self-employed. There were some geographical differences. Most people forget, they always write off London as being hugely successful. Actually, it's been especially badly hit, along with Scotland. Other parts of the UK with fewer representation of SMEs and the self-employed has been less badly hit. Newer businesses, startups have actually stopped, and at least 10% have actually ceased trading. However, the data for the self-employed is even more worrying and dramatic. The current century has seen quite a dramatic increase in self-employment in the UK, so that it now meets the European average of 15%. And immediately we know that, the total labour market at the end of that period, i.e. 2018, before the pandemic, was around 5 million. 500,000 at least have ceased trading. But if we look at it more in human terms, it's very, very interesting that the people who have not, as to his title, have not thrived, have actually not survived, have often been the self-employed who are older men, who have been the traditional bedrock of our self-employed population. 75% have seen loss of income of all the self-employed. And another matter already raised is the level of stress reported by people who are working on their own, struggling on their own, etc. And 25%, which is 1.5 million of the previous self-employed population, are now seeking employee roles. Next, please. The government, as in most countries, as we know, and I know the situation in Australia, they introduced a job support scheme where basically money for employees was provided to the employer who made the claim on their behalf and maintained the level of income. 11.6 million jobs, which was covered the SMEs as well. In terms of employees, the 11.6 million jobs received financial support at an estimated cost of 70 billion, maybe about 120 billion US Australian dollars. I'm not sure, but it's an eye-watering amount of money. And SMEs have also been given some support through loans and some preferential opportunities to try and survive during the pandemic. By contrast, of course, the self-employed as micro businesses, nano businesses, initially received no support whatsoever. And this was quite a shock. A lot of lobbying had to be done to ensure that the self-employed did get support through a scheme called the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, very complicated and very limited. As was usual with this current government we have in the UK, there was confusing information, lots of minor changes, and difficulties in actually accessing the scheme. Estimates are that only 40% of the then 5 million, only 40% of the estimated 5 million did not get any help at all. So again, although this very generous scheme for larger firms, for the smallest of all businesses, it was a bit of a mess, actually, quite frankly. So can we move on to, please? So the overall position is that although a number of SMEs, though not many self-employed, saw some growth, but it did depend which sector you were in. So it has been a very, very nuanced impact on employment and small businesses. If we look at the victims, as I would put it really, which is the self-employed, they've been battered by lots of other policy developments in the UK, not just Brexit. And there is a very real feeling abroad in the UK that these very small businesses are in the shooting line for the government, who thinks they're all semi-crooks. And they are fiddling this and fiddling that. And so they are being challenged on all sides. So that is, they've got a triple whammy, which is the virus, Brexit, and other developments in the UK. The other thing that we have discovered is that the schemes themselves were so open to fraud. 4 billion is reckoned by our tax authority to have been accessed fraudulently, 2 billion of which was undertaken by organised crime. However, I do want to think from a point of view, just finally, being a lawyer, as it were, what I think the pandemic has thrown up is, for anybody operating in business or in the labour market, how the role of regulation and its enforcement, or in the UK's case, lack of enforcement, including even health and safety laws, has been no response by or virtually no response by the organisations required to police, to ensure safety. And that it's difficult to think of something more important than that during the pandemic. And we've seen, therefore, a kind of hands-off approach, which actually has devalued the role of regulation, and therefore the issues of accountability when things go wrong have also been highlighted by the pandemic. So just the last slide, please. So who have been the winners and losers? Is that the next slide, Tui, please? Is there another one? Thank you. Yes, the winners of the pandemic have been big business, especially those who had government contracts, and a lot of profits have been made. Some SMEs have thrived, especially those who operated online. Those that have done less well have been in the service sectors, startups, and in certain geographical areas. But the losers have definitely been the micro businesses, the self-employed and the sole traders, who anyway very often lack support, and many simply didn't know where to turn at that crucial moment. So the losers, Tui, are... That's me done. Thank you.
Yeah, a very early good morning from northern Germany, actually, from Flensburg, a border town, to Denmark, where I am now. Thanks a lot, Tui, for having me at your symposium. And I'd be happy to say a few words about the case of the EU. My idea was to talk a little bit about Denmark specifically. Denmark, that's the country, next door, and where I work. I work at the University of Southern Denmark. And as Tui mentioned, I'm very well connected to the ECSB, which is the partner organization of SEAANZ in Europe. Yeah, how does the situation look like in Denmark? So first of all, a bit about the situation. We had a lockdown last year in March. So as you probably all know, the virus was spread somewhere over, let's say, Christmas, probably even before, to Europe. And then that was the time when, let's say, all the countries recognized what's happening. That ended then in April, and we had a second lockdown in Denmark starting in November last year, and a gradual reopening then in spring this year. And there were several non-pharmaceutical interventions, probably similar to most of the countries. So many of us were sent home from public workplaces, educational institutions, and then lots of, let's say, private activities were not possible anymore, especially with shops and restaurants and bigger gatherings. But in September this year, Denmark announced a so-called Freedom Day, what Pat also knows from the UK, I think. So the last restriction was dropped. Denmark had a Corona pass, as they called it. So specifically an app showing whether someone had the disease earlier, was vaccinated, etc. And Denmark so there's a little crescendo in this presentation. It did not count COVID-19 as a socially critical disease any longer. There were very low numbers of new cases, and quite a high rate of the population has been vaccinated. But overall, there were more than 500 days with restrictions to limit the spread. And as of yesterday, actually, I think the 9th, I updated this, more than 400,000 cases and 2,740 people died. And this has to be seen in light of the entire population in Denmark. So Denmark is a small country with less than 6 million people. Yeah, challenges of the pandemic, especially for the economies. We all know increased uncertainty, restrictions to operate, and fully jeopardized markets. What was the influence of that in Denmark? Unemployment rates increased, I would say slightly increased, and have already more or less stabilized, let's say, at least for the moment. GDP, we can say, was overall not really that much affected. So all the estimations so far are positive. Let's see how that really develops. And then there were also several supporting measures from the government to companies and to employees. I think in a way similar in several European countries. Pat also spoke about that. There is also a postponement of VAT payments in Denmark. I tried to find something like, let's say, first studies. There's a very interesting study from Kim Kluver and Sune Løve-Nielsen. They are my colleagues in Kolding. What they tried is they looked into SMEs, young SMEs turnover expectations. So they could not really get, let's say, stable or solid performance measures, but due to that reason, they looked into expectations, and actually they had kind of a second survey, which was last year in autumn. So this is compared to now, maybe a bit earlier in the pandemic. And also comparable to what Pat says, there are not only crisis victims, but there are about 40% of young SMEs in Denmark that can be seen as victims. They also counted crisis immunes, about 30%, and crisis exploiters, a bit more than 30% in Denmark. So there is not a full list in that study, but I think we can imagine that, especially in the online markets, packaging and all that, that there are also exploiters. Kim and Sune looked into their coping strategies, and there is a very nice paper. Actually, the official publication is from this year, but it was available earlier, about strategic responses of companies to crisis. And they see, 4 of those here: retrenchment, so cost reductions; perseverance, so just endurance by, let's say, reorganizing in a way, restructuring in a way; then innovation and exit. And we also work on a study where we included another one, which is co-opetition. The two looked into several of those strategies. Actually, they did not include exit because they were only looking at SMEs that were still alive, and they compared a little bit between a narrow and a broad strategy. A narrow strategy means that the companies, the CEOs answered that they go for this strategy as much as possible. So that was kind of a narrow strategy. They looked into Danish young SMEs and looked into how are these strategies then associated with turnover expectations. And the results are that there are differences in how effective strategies are linked to those turnover expectations. And that depends on how the crisis affected this SME in the first place. So the crisis strategy overall matters for either an optimistic or a pessimistic expectation for the future. And more concretely, those that are following a narrow retrenchment, so cost reduction strategy, also expected a decreasing turnover. So cost reduction is associated to a decreasing turnover expectation for the next year, which is now. And those that follow a broad, persevering, broad innovation or narrow innovation strategy expected increasing turnover this year. Yeah, and together with Muhammad Karimzad, I am looking into some specific cases. So we are doing a case study research with 4 innovative tech SMEs in Denmark. And we looked into decision-making logics and compare those with different coping strategies. So very specifically, we look into effectuation theory. So we combined a little bit these decision heuristics or decision-making logics and look whether they have changed those and how they are related to coping strategies. And we can see from those cases that the CEOs partly changed their decision logic, especially from a dominant causal to an effectual logic, because, and that goes quite in line with Saraswati's hypothesis on that, because there is specific uncertainty during the crisis. And we also find that this is somewhat related here. So we can make a proposition that this is related to the SME's position in the market and to its degree of external resources. I have a little proposition here, putting that into a figure. So we see a link between causal logic and innovation, between effectual logic and persevering, between effectual logic and retrenchment, and between a mix of those logics and coopetition. And then we link that to weak or strong need for external resources and the relatively weak or strong position in the industry. This is still ongoing, and it's a case-based study, so we are working only with 4 cases. So this is just a theoretical proposition here. Yeah, then a little bit back to the Danish situation as such. Probably overall, Denmark has done quite well so far as a country, but there was one bigger, let's say, issue that you might all have heard about, the thing with the minks. Denmark used to have over 1,000 mink farms, and the disease broke out among the minks, and there was a mutated virus, and that was seen as a serious issue. And
for all businesses and the labour market through COVID.
I think I can hear someone talking. Any comment or question? No, then I continue. Denmark decided that all mink must be culled, and I think they even had to bury out the minks again because they wanted to figure out more about the mutation. So that was already last year's November. So that was one of the kind of big issues in Denmark. I also looked a little bit into Denmark's, let's say, recovery. So what is said, also a little bit more politically. In August, very positively. So the economy growing again at a brisk pace. Employment activities already back to the level or even exceed the level before the outbreak, faster than expected, and that the vaccine allows control of the pandemic, and that there was a lot of economic support. So here Denmark saw itself recovering, and now comes the little crescendo here. You might also expect that the recovery is maybe not the full recovery yet. Only on November 7th, so just very few days ago, Mette Frederiksen, who is the head of the government in Denmark, announces new initiatives against the coronavirus. So the disease again is seen as something very serious, and just on November 8th, it is reclassified as a socially critical illness. And as the first thing which Denmark will do is, I think by tomorrow, the Corona passport will be back. So as first measures for several occasions, mainly bigger gatherings, the Corona passport will be needed again. I also looked a little bit beyond Denmark, especially Germany, because that's my home country. What's happening in Germany in September, it was announced that the Opel plant in Eisenach closes until end of the year, which I see as a more serious thing right now after all that happened earlier. Airline industry, many also bigger companies, there were serious measures, but also big support. Now Opel decided to close down for a while, and here we can also see the supply chain bottlenecks. Then this is here government and our close to government institute that is looking into all the corona numbers. The boss Wieler is warning of a brilliant course of the fourth wave in Germany, and together with the Minister of Health, they very much recommend double vaccinations against flu and corona. That was already in October. We do not only see lack of truck drivers in UK, but for example, also in Germany, in several industries, we are also having this skills shortage, which is getting worse and comes on top of the situation with the supply bottlenecks. And also, I have nothing on this here, no headline here, but in Denmark and Germany, I know it's also very critical when it comes to nurses, caretakers, and so forth. So many people are fed up with the situation and just resign from their jobs, which makes the situation even more critical. And this is from this week. The government in Germany will return to free corona testing, which was abolished a month ago because they wanted to motivate non-vaccinated people to get the vaccine. So they wanted it to be costly in a way, and now they go back to free testing. That was from November 8. Now I think we are at an incidence of 243. We are starting to postpone those surgeries that can be planned, etc. So I think we need to accept that the pandemic is not over and that winter is coming in Europe. So yeah, more to come. And then also
my hopes that you would be giving us joy and sunshine.
Yeah. Difficult for now. I think you need to do that because summer is coming in Australia. Here's a bit about the supply chain. So especially in the Eurozone and in the US, still big problems with that. We can see it everywhere. Go to IKEA shops or wherever. It's terrible. And yeah, my last word that I want to say is I really hope that we will learn from this pandemic, maybe more pandemics to come. So we are not really good in listening to the scientists. And we had a terrible flood this summer in Germany, which came along with corona. So it also made numbers increase because people had really other worries than corona. In this big flood, and it's another big issue with the climate, and I really hope that we will find solutions.